So we're going to do season 3. That's a thing that's happening.
Are you ready for senior year? This is going to be our year.
Rap of ages.
I'm going down, baby. Don't street in the Cadillac grills, Cadillac mills. Check out the oil, my Cadillac. Watch yourself, shake your ass. I came there with my front like they had the manpower like more or less, more so.
Rap of ages.
How many licks does it take? I will be by your side. To the other, oh my dog is bigger than him. Ha, him.
Like going on. You say it's puppy love. We say it's full grown.
Season 3. It is senior year of high school all over again. It's our 20-year reunion.
This is fabulous. I am ready to relive high school. And you know what I realized though about like in high school, like if you got a car, but like you gotta have a car, you gotta have a crew, right? And you gotta have a crew. You gotta have a crew. You gotta have an expansive crew. And and you know what I think I realized? Dave, I think we both realized this, is that there are times on this podcast where just we do not agree on things.
That
Songs.
is correct.
We don't. And this is why I think we realize that you might need to have an arbiter, a mediator for our disagreements on the podcast. What do you think?
I think that's a grand idea.
Who should join the podcast to talk about our high school days? Who could we coerce to do that with us?
Who could it be?
Hey guys.
Oh, hello there. Didn't see you in there.
It's Jared. It's me. It's Jared.
Welcome to the podcast.
Jared Johnson. Look at this fucker. What have you been up to?
Hey. Thank you. First time, long time. Glad to be on with you guys. It's a pleasure.
So, Jared, we've been asking you to come on this podcast for about a year. That microphone shipment finally came through.
Yeah, to be honest with you, the reason that I am now on this podcast is that I finally got my shit together, is the long and short of it. I just couldn't get a microphone and headphones until just now, and I finally did.
And all it took was a global quarantine order and delays in non-essential services.
Yeah, I think it was really season 2. Things gelled, and I was like, I gotta be a part of this thing. It's gonna take off without me, and I'm gonna be sitting on my ass wondering why, like Walter White.
Could have been somebody. Could have been a kingpin.
That's right.
But you just want to keep it real.
That's right. We're keeping it real.
Well, that's what you're here to do for this podcast, Jared. So why don't you tell us what qualifies you to be a member of the Rap of Ages team? Because we are two very qualified individuals here.
That is true. Well, I know you two, so that's the first step.
You're hired. No, wait, please continue. Go on.
As you said, we grew up together. I think we all kind of got turned on to hip hop around the same time. I always listened to hip hop here and there when I was younger, but I think really around this time in high school, when I got into high school, is when I really started to get into hip hop more, because basically that's at my high school. That's pretty much the only thing everybody listened to. Like all of my friends and everyone I knew, they all listened to hip hop, and I converted pretty quickly.
So do you remember your first hip hop album?
I think my earliest memory of having a hip hop album was the Doggy Style album.
There it is.
And I bought it. This was when it was still out on tape. I'm pretty sure I bought it at Coconuts.
Sounds right.
I remember, I don't think I had bought it. It came out in 93. I don't think I had it that early. I think I had it sometime in middle school, maybe. But I remember I tore up the cover art to the album because I was afraid my mom would find it and she would wonder what this is, because it's a pretty dirty cover. and there's more stuff inside. And I was like, okay, well, let's just keep the tape to itself. And I remember I wore that out. I listened to that so much. I had initially heard of Snoop from my babysitter. She had played "My Name Is" or "What's My Name" on her stereo, and I was like, oh my god, what is this?
What a
And then I
great
bought the album, and my mind was just blown. I was like, this is the filthiest thing that I have ever heard in my life. And a lot of it was above my head at the time, but I knew it was bad, and I wasn't supposed to be listening to it, and that's what really kind of turned
that
me
what
on
turned
to it.
you onto the hip hop. I
Yeah.
remember listening to. I want to say that was probably around 5th or 6th grade when you had that album. I'm pretty sure my tape of Doggy Style is a copy of your tape.
It's definitely a possibility.
I'm certain because I know I never had the original or any of the album art or any of it, but I do recall having a tape and listening to it in my Walkman
Yeah.
way back in the day.
Nice.
Yeah. After that, I think my first real album that I like bought and I was like getting into hip hop was in high school, and I bought Harlem World when it came out. That was like huge my freshman year of high school, and that was another one I wore out, and that was the first one I was like really understood it at that point, and I was like, oh wow, I was just kind of blown away by, and that just opened up the whole Bad Boy family from there.
So, Jared, you don't listen to rap music anymore. Is that correct?
I mean, I listen to here and there the newer stuff, not as much though. If I do listen to music, I'll throw it back to these times, to the 90s, to the 2000s, some earlier stuff.
So when we started this podcast, part of the impetus for this podcast was kind of like, and we talk about it every episode, like where a song went wrong and kind of where hip hop was starting to go wrong. And I think for a lot of people our age, maybe older, maybe younger, there was like, this golden diamond age of hip hop in the sort of mid 90s into the late 90s. And this was about the time hip hop starts to transform, starts to go a little bit pop, starts to change a little bit. So can you think of like a year or a time when like hip hop just started to fall off your radar, when things like, when you're like, I don't really listen to all the new stuff that comes out anymore? Like, what was one of the last either good albums or one of the songs or albums that was later on where you're just like, oh, you know what? This is like no longer for me.
Yeah, I think the turning point, I don't remember a specific year, but I think it was in like the late 2000s, early 2010s. And in my mind, I kind of pin it all on Drake.
Go on.
I don't dislike Drake, and I actually think his earlier stuff was really good. But I feel like at some point he switched over to a different kind of flow, this kind of start-stop hesitation that I feel like was kind of the seeds of mumble rap, and it just kind of skyrocketed. He Euro-stepped. Yeah, he got everything off beat, and I can't follow it, and the lyrics just went downhill after that, and I feel like he spawned a generation of terrible rappers. And not to say I don't like hip hop still. I still think there's a lot of quality artists out there. Kendrick Lamar has come out with new stuff, recently that I think is fantastic. But just as a whole, I'm just not as into the whole hip hop scene currently.
So senior year of high school, we're talking the year 2000. We graduated in 2001, but obviously we were starting the year in the year 2000. Some interesting shit happened in the year 2000. So before we get into the music scene, you guys want to know a couple things I wrote, and curious if you guys, I'm sure you have to remember all these things. So what happened in the year 2000? Obviously with Nelly and the Rams, the greatest show on turf was the year 2000.
Yep. That was a great Super Bowl.
Wasn't
that the one where they came up like inches short at the very end?
Yep.
Where the guys like diving for the goal line?
Can I tell you, I watched
the
that
Titans,
back.
right?
It was. I remember the Titans. That was the greatest. That's the greatest. The Yankees and the Mets. I'm not a baseball fan, but the Subway Series, first since the 50s.
Was that in the playoffs?
That
was the first time that they...
That was the World Series.
Time.
Oh, World Series. Oh, wow.
Yep. And Dave's
I'm
Mets lost.
clearly not a baseball fan either.
The Mets were in a World Series. It was very exciting. Of course, they didn't win because it's the Mets.
No, they lost it. Were they swept?
It was a
think there
5-game series, so I think they pulled out one win. Piazza tried to fight some dudes. Things got heated in that series, but it did not lead to Mets victories, sadly.
Venus Williams won her first championship. That was Wimbledon.
No.
And he didn't become big, but I didn't realize this, even though we were all watching wrestling. The year 2000, John Cena signed with the WWF in the year 2000.
Yeah, he definitely didn't become big till much later than that, right?
The other thing that happened in the year 2000 was Bush and Gore election.
What?
Yeah, that happened.
That was a whole thing that happened. It was the first year we could vote for the presidency, and it went swimmingly.
And Florida fucked it all up.
Florida and the Supreme Court and hanging Chads.
I was going to say, thanks, Chad.
Hanging Chads.
Thanks, Chad.
Yeah, that was a whole thing that happened. It was a delight.
What about Y2K? Y2K happened.
What? Okay, so Jared, tell us what Y2K was, or tell the millennials what Y2K was.
So basically, Y2K stood for the year 2000, and there was a big hubbub because people didn't think
I think it
that
was a hullabaloo.
a hullabaloo. Yeah, it might have been a hullabaloo. Might have been
think it
more
was
than
a-
a hullabaloo. Almost pandemonium.
Pandemonium. Yeah,
But
that's closer to what it was.
basically, people were concerned that in programming electronics and everything that kept the time and date, that they didn't account for when things flipped over in the year 2000, if basically everything would just shut down and there would be mass chaos and power outages and everything would be erased from computers, and there was a lot of conspiracy theories and speculation about what might happen. And it turns out that, as far as I know, nothing happened.
Tech in 2000, flip phones, Razor, the
the
Motorola
Razr.
Razor was in 2000. Baby G watches were a big
that a thing?
deal. They were a thing with the ladies. And original iPods were
Really?
coming out in 2000. Yep.
Wow.
So you could put your music on this thing called an MP3 and carry around like 20 songs with you at once. It was tremendous. Jared, I remember, did not have an iPod. He had.
I don't think I had much, and I was trying to think back.
You
and
had a
like,
Zune or whatever it was, the
Zune.
Microsoft thing.
did I have that in a senior year of high school? I don't know if I got any of
believe
this stuff that early.
That was senior year of high school or college. I remember I had one of the Diamond Rio MP3 players in high school
Ooh.
that had a 256 megabyte, I want to say, or maybe it was 64 megabytes. Might have been 64 megabyte.
Whatever it was
flash
massive
drive.
back
That's
then.
way
It
too
was
big.
huge. I could
You
fit
probably
like
had
2
four.
albums on it. It was enormous.
What?
It was crazy.
You were the first with an iPod. You absolutely were with the click wheel.
Well, I don't
Those
know.
were so advanced.
Yeah, I didn't get
We
that.
all
I
had
don't think
CD players.
until college. But Jared had definitely. You did have a Zune at one point.
I definitely
remember
did,
this.
yes. I try to think back into the time periods and thinking back to 2000, and I try to think of the cell phones that I've had throughout the years. But I don't think that I even had a cell phone in high school. I think I had one friend, Pat, who had a cell phone, and we kind of just used his. And I don't think I got one until I went to college, because I saw the Nokia was big that year. And I think
Right.
that was the phone that I ended up getting whenever I
I didn't
got
have one until I went to college either. I remember a couple of our parents had cell phones like for work, and it cost like $5 a minute to make a
Mhm.
call, and it was like only if somebody died or like was losing
Right.
a limb or was dying, because presumably if they're dead, like you'll figure it out later. But if they like, you know, were dying, I guess you would use the cell phone, because then it would be worth the money to make the phone call for
See,
whatever it cost.
I had the cell phone because I was on my dad's plan, because I had a cell phone when I was like 13. I was like one of the first ones to have that.
Oh,
I know. But my senior year, what I had though is we had the Nextel phones where you could use them as a walkie-talkie too.
oh
So-
yeah, I remember those.
Because then it didn't cost minutes. It was like,
Right, that noise.
yep.
My uncle
like-
had one of those. Yeah, I
Yep.
remember that noise.
I was chiming back and forth. Oh, it was awesome. I was awesome. I was walkie-talkie and my dad. It's great.
Delightful. But now, Jared, you've upgraded to a beeper.
That's true.
So
I
that's
do
good.
still have a beeper. That's true.
So
Every
you
time
know
I
how
tell
those
somebody I have
work.
a beeper.
Are you
Right.
serious?
Well, for work, they still use a beeper.
Do they really?
Yeah. Well, I have
That's
the
how you get
option.
drugs in Los Angeles.
I have the option, but to use a cell phone, but I miss too many calls and texts, and you know, sometimes the old stuff is what works best.
In culture and politics and technology, all these other things happening in the year 2000. What was going on with music then? We're coming off 99. We're coming off 98. Things are changing. It's Y2K. What's happening with music?
Well, the hip hop scene, it's still going strong. You still have Eminem and Jay-Z and Outkast putting out albums that are still bangers, still things I listen to this day. You got Nelly coming on the scene. You got
Hot
Wu-Tang
shit.
still making material. You have the posthumous Big Pun album. So I mean, there's still a ton of just great hip hop being turned out right now.
When I was looking at the list too, I wonder if 2000 was the start of like a transitional year, almost where it's like where almost like hip hop is trying to find out maybe like what's next. Where I think that it was very, you were either east or you were west, right? Like it was really East Coast, West Coast, and then I think Dr. Dre is obviously very much West Coast, but then Eminem is a very different sound. And that's massive in the year 2000. But then you've got Ludacris out of Atlanta, you've got Nelly from St. Louis, you've got people trying to do things with a lot of like the little kid rap is now like people are just looking for maybe something different or that hot new thing, and they're not trying to be the next one in the same, like I'm the next big West Coast or I'm the next big East Coast. It's almost like people are trying to create a new style.
I would say for me, this time period is kind of the end of what we used to call old school hip hop, because you have these groups that are kind of phasing it. You have all these new groups coming in. The sound is changing. Pac and Biggie have been gone for a few years at this point, so it's gangster rap's kind of fading out as like the mainstream portion of hip hop. But also like groups like Sugar Hill Gang, De La Soul, Tribe Called Quest, a lot of these like old school groups with like long staying power that had been putting out album after album throughout the 90s are really kind of tapering off. At least, some of them may still be recording. Some of the stuff is still good in that period, but they're by no means the mainstream anymore. And you have a lot of new artists coming out with different sounds, and they're blending things into hip hop. Is no longer just this urban sound that's coming out of the Bronx or coming out of the deep South or wherever it's coming from. It's blending pop, it's blending R&B, and it's blending a lot of other things that are happening in music. And I think if you look at a lot of what was popular in the 2000s, R&B influence was huge. This was like the year of like that convergence between R&B and hip hop, and where a lot of that started to blend into the mainstream.
Another thing I think it's kind of interesting too is I think because you've got so many different opportunities, I really think of you may or may not have been burning CDs off of Napster or LimeWire or anything like that, but like you used to have to spend your hard-earned money on a particular album, and then you'd wear it out, as Jared, as you were saying before, like you'd run that album into the ground, and then maybe you'd like switch with a friend, but like the access to music was much more limited. I think this is the beginning of just there's a lot more stuff out there, and you're able to find a lot more stuff.
Well, you talk about like iPods, you talk about digital music and all of this, and like people weren't listening to albums as much, they were listening to singles. And so like you even have like these DJ mixtapes that were coming out. You have the Professional DJ Clue, you have the Rough Riders Volume 2 that came out in 2000, and these are all kind of like professional mixtapes that you would buy as an album, but really it's a mixtape. And like you had all the DJs putting out big mixtapes, like all the New York DJs had mixtapes back then, and that was like how you would used to listen to mixes. But now you could like download it in your own home, download just the songs you like, put them all on an iPod, put them all in a digital music player, and listen to whatever. You didn't have to listen to music in the way the artist curated it for you.
Yeah, I also feel like 2000 was really the year of the Neptunes. I mean, just look at the stuff that they produced that year, and it's just like so many amazing songs and albums that they produced.
Yeah, you mentioned like when we were talking about the season, you're like, "Oh, we should cover the Neptunes." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, that makes sense." Then I went and looked back at all the songs I was like, "Oh, the Neptunes produced all these songs."
Yeah, I was looking at that today at the
They
list,
did
and I was
all of
like,
them.
"Oh, this is everything."
Yeah.
And I noticed, the thing that stands out to me, they have that certain sound that's on the Jay-Z "I Just Want to Love You," and it's on a couple other ones like that. It sounds almost like they're playing the comb. You know how you can like play a comb if you put some paper over it and like blowing it? It sounds like that. I really want to know how they make that sound.
I would like for you to go get a comb and
Please,
attempt
I
to
was
do
just
that.
gonna say, I don't know what you're talking about. Please explain further.
So you take a comb, like a plastic comb, and you put a piece of paper over it, and you basically like, I don't know if you blow into it or what, but it makes a sound similar to that sound that they have on a lot of their tracks. Yeah,
Was that kind of the noise? That was
sort of
like
like
the
that.
screech of today, which is on every hip hop song. Back then it was
Right.
totally different. It's music has changed so much. You had a lot of other things going on, right? You had the Midwest coming up. You had socially conscious hip hop started to become a thing. You had groups like in the late 90s, like Black Star split off into solo artists like Mos Def and Talib Kweli start their solo careers in the late 90s. Common has a huge album in 2000. And you have artists that are not just like talking about money and power and women and all this other stuff. They're kind of talking about social issues and politics and things that are a little like heavier and weightier, but still making popular music.
Yeah, I really enjoy a lot of that type of hip hop too. And I wasn't even on my radar until I got to college. I remember my RA introduced me to Mos Def, and I was like, "Oh, wow, this is different than anything else I've heard before."
What else was happening? We mentioned the Lils. There's still a lot of little kids rapping. Lil Kim was huge that year. It was like, who could have a younger rapper?
I can get a 13-year-old on the track. I can get a 7-year-old on the track. Fine. Name that tune.
You want to know who was huge in 2000 that we have not talked about at all? And it's important to cover in this episode because he put out 2 albums, not one, but 2 hit albums in the year 2000. Not a man, but an Afro man.
Oh, Afro motherfucking MAN?
Oh, God.
He put out 2 albums?
He put out 2 albums in the year 2000. And if you want to talk about a different sort of hip hop sound, you have like, he was like stoner rap.
Yeah.
And that was sort of
rap.
a thing. Like you had all these weird subgenres of rap music. And this was one of just like, you had it in rock, you've had it in other musics for a long time, but you really didn't have as many niche sounds in hip hop until like later into the 90s, 2000s. And
Thanks, Internet.
yeah. So listen to some Afro, man.
Are we recommending that?
Yes.
Go back and listen to some Afro, man.
Some Colt 45?
Colt 45 and 2 zigzags. Baby, that's all you need.
Smoke that tumbleweed.
Smoke that tumbleweed. As the marijuana burn, we can take our turn singing them dirty rap songs.
And I think that's a perfect end of the episode. Explosion right there.
Yeah, boom. Boom.